Spring 1942. While war raged across the battlefields of Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, Adolf Hitler settled into his newest bunker, the Wolf's Lair.
People are dying across the world because of Hitler. Rather than focus on that huge issue, he's focusing on a microcosm. He's taking a little tiny detail of control and practicing. How perfectly can he get his dogs to do what they're told? He's fiddling whilst Rome burns.
Hitler. Who was the man behind the monster?
There were just so many parts of this story that didn't add up.
Teenage loner turned national hero.
He was the Messiah for the German people.
How was he able to achieve it?
All of it was an act. All of it was a show.
This is the definitive guide to the most hated man in history. For almost 10 years, Hitler had reveled in his success as leader of Germany. But the tides of war would soon turn against him, resulting in millions of deaths and marking the start of his downfall. Seven weeks after Hitler declared war on the United States, a capacity crowd gathered at Berlin's Sportpalast Arena, eager to hear him speak.
The Sportpalast speech represents restatement of Hitler's prophecy, that the Americans have forced the Germans into a world war, and that a world war will result in the annihilation of the Jews of Europe. We can read it as an initiation into this huge program of mass killing that is now about to really take off. So rather than a threat, as it was in Hitler's 1939 prophecy, this is now something that's actually happening.
This speech was the closest Hitler ever came to publicly acknowledging the Holocaust. Three years earlier, Hitler endorsed a Nazi euthanasia program, which systematically murdered Germany's physically and mentally disabled.
The T4 program is one of the most disturbing elements of the early years of the Third Reich, and Hitler was directly associated with it, and it stained him irrevocably. The German people reacted against it, and they associated Hitler with it, but he had learnt his lesson.
Hitler became scrupulous when it came to keeping the blood of the Jewish slaughter off his hands.
There is no paper trail linking Adolf Hitler to the Holocaust. And this is an extraordinary thing in such a highly bureaucratized state that kept meticulous records of every single minor activity.
Great lengths were taken to ensure that there wouldn't be a written order to the effect of, okay, murder all the Jews in Europe.
Hitler demanded his world remain insulated. He never visited an extermination camp, nor did he ever witness an execution.
I think the most surprising thing about Adolf Hitler is his inability to face up to his actions. He's someone who needs to be in a closed society, almost a closed world, but also connected with that is the fact that he believed that he may be killed and that his destiny would not be fulfilled.
He's like a kind of classic gangster. They don't want to be reminded of the deep immorality they're absolutely mired in up to their necks. It is murder and it's blood-soaked. When he's patting those small children on the head, there are small children several hundred miles to the east having their heads smashed against the side of railway carriages. But it's a reality that nobody wants to acknowledge.
At his country headquarters, the Berghof, Hitler held forth on many subjects, but he never mentioned the Holocaust. And his entourage were careful never to bring it up. In her memoirs, Henrietta von Schirach, the daughter of Hitler's personal photographer, recalled breaking the unspoken rule.
She's seen Jewish women being brutalised in Amsterdam, and she's determined to raise it with Hitler under the almost charmingly misguided belief that Hitler would be appalled in the same way as she is. So she goes to the Berghof, she has some tea, a slice of cake, and she mentions this horrible, horrible thing that she's seen in Amsterdam. And Hitler just snaps. Jewish women in Amsterdam, what are they got to do with you? Literally shouts at her, and he just orders her out, and she leaves the room in tears. And she's never to be seen at the Berghof ever again.
On the 23rd of January 1942, Hitler invited SS chief Heinrich Himmler and other senior aides for a quiet meal. According to his staff's official memos, private moments like this allowed the Führer to give the Holocaust his blessing. Without issuing a direct order.
They're having a fine meal, immaculate tablecloth, everything just so, very civilized encounter, in which the conversation turns, as it often does with Hitler, to the Jews.
The talk is chilling. It's not bureaucratic, but it's Hitler saying things like, if I had to say to the Jews, could you just go voluntarily, and they said they didn't want to, then I'd see no other option but extermination.
Notice here how Hitler doesn't tell anyone to do something specific. He allows those around the table to draw their own conclusions.
Hitler didn't need to deal with the practicalities of Jewish genocide, because he knew Heinrich Himmler would, a process known as working towards the Führer.
Everyone knows how Hitler feels about the Jews, and the way to curry favor with him is to anticipate his hatred. The more radical solution is the one likely to be adopted in Nazi Germany as the war goes on.
Different bodies and individuals compete to have access to Hitler and to have their ideas authorized by him. And the SS's control of a Jewish policy is because Himmler is, at this point, Hitler's favorite. If you want to know what Hitler is thinking, you look at what Himmler is doing.
Three days before his meal with Hitler, Himmler's Nazi SS met at this stately home in a Berlin suburb. On the agenda, the final solution to the Jewish question. Ever since Hitler passed anti-Semitic laws in 1933, Jews had been brutally persecuted, and 1.2 million had been killed in the past year. Now the Nazis aimed to deport every Jew in Europe. Their fate was industrialized murder in new extermination camps with gas chambers.
In Hitler's last will and testament, he makes clear that he is very proud of the way in which the people that have had to be killed for the Greater Germany have been killed in a humane way. He thinks the whole concept of gassing is a good, clean way of killing people.
He knows what's going on when they arrive at Treblinka or Sobibor or Auschwitz, when they are herded into the gas chambers. But for Hitler, the Holocaust is something which is done by other people.
Hitler had experienced unbridled success as leader of Germany for nearly a decade. But the tide was starting to turn. The US and Soviet Union were proving formidable enemies. Hitler was undeterred.
For Hitler, this is to be a war of annihilation. It is a clash of civilizations. It is a clash of races. And there will be no second place. Either Germany or the Soviet Union will be completely destroyed.
Winter 1941. At his Wolf's Lair HQ, 500 miles from the front line, Adolf Hitler decided to take personal control of a new Eastern offensive.
You've got a man who wants to be the supreme warlord, but desperately also wants to be the person right there in the middle of operations. And you can't do all that.
But when a devastating Soviet counteroffensive led his generals to recommend tactical withdrawals, Hitler overruled them and issued a halt order. His troops had to stand and fight to the death.
In human terms, this is a very, very expensive order. The number of men who are lost, hundreds of thousands. But that doesn't matter because Hitler only thinks in the short term. As far as he's concerned, the halt order has worked.
The idea of strategic withdrawal, which every military commander knows is necessary in certain circumstances, for him is irrational, it's going to lower morale, and it certainly shouldn't happen. It draws attention in Hitler's mind to the ability of his generals. There's always been a fragile relationship between the two. While things are going well, he's prepared to let them get on with it. But as soon as they don't go so well, he begins to take a more hands-on approach.
On the 20th of April 1942, Hitler celebrated his 53rd birthday. He was so determined to tighten his grip on military command, he refused to leave the Wolf's Lair. His political and military leaders were forced to come to him.
Hitler's what we would now call a control freak, beyond all bounds. He needs to assert his dominance over other people without exception at all times. We see somebody who, as a child, had this overbearing father beating him and humiliating him. So Hitler starts off from a position of extreme weakness, and it's something he never wants to experience again.
What it looks like, everybody's smiling, but there are some subtle nonverbal things that we can identify that suggest that all is not going well here, and then there's an undertone of tension. Let's stop right here. This man and Hitler are shaking hands. One thing that's very telling here is there's personal distance that he wants to close, because we tend to draw closer to people we like. So he tries to pull him in, but Hitler clearly is very reluctant. There it is, right there. He's pulling him in and he steps in. He's trying to send a nonverbal message to Hitler: let bygones be bygones. Whatever problems we had in the past, they're over with. Let's be friends again.
This man was Nazi Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, who strongly opposed Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union.
The gentleman in the back, he's trying to read what's going on because he knows there's tension. And this is not a happy birthday. There's some kind of undercurrent going on there that lets us know that this may be the beginning of a break with Hitler and his generals.
Isolated at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's controlling nature worsened. His days were spent training his German shepherd, Blondie, and interfering in every military decision, no matter how small.
Hitler insists that any German soldier wanting to marry a foreign woman submit photographs and a resume of the foreign woman to him for his own personal review. It was just the madness that drove him. His ability to obsess about little details like that, even as this titanic war was raging.
On the 28th of June 1942, Hitler launched his new Eastern Offensive, demanding the final say on all military strategy. He decided to send over 1 million troops towards the southern Soviet Union.
Instead of heading for Moscow, which is where most of his generals wanted to go, he now redirects the efforts south of that towards the Caucasus, the oil fields of the Caucasus, but also this symbolic prize, which is Stalingrad on the Volga River, the city, of course, named after his great foe and the leader of Russia. He's going to capture that city because if he does it, it's going to be a huge humiliation for Stalin.
These private photographs show Hitler imposing his will on seasoned commanders.
It's command by remote control. There's Hitler sweeping his hand across vast maps of the USSR. And that's where the problems come, because the German generals are consummate professionals.
They would have done what was militarily most effective. They would have withdrawn before Moscow, regrouped in order to attack from a more favorable position at a better time. They would not have sidetracked themselves to fight for this symbolic city that had no real significance.
They know about logistics, they know about the twin tyrannies of time and space. Hitler is not. He goes with his intuition.
"11 days into the new Eastern Offensive, Hitler ignored the objections of his generals and split one of his army groups to attack Stalingrad. The decision weakened his forces in the south, and they struggled to gain ground. At a forward command base in the Ukraine, Hitler's frustration boiled over.
It's hot, it's humid. The news from the front is increasingly bad. He turns to his chief of the general staff, General Franz Halder, and says, "You don't know anything about making war. I was a soldier on the front in World War I. I know more than you do. What did you do in World War I? You sat there on that same stool in front of that same table drawing on your maps. You don't have a wound badge."
In an unprecedented move, Hitler fired General Wilhelm List and took personal command of his army group. Germany's supreme leader was now micromanaging the day-to-day logistics of 300,000 men.
We have Hitler calling up front commanders and saying, "Where are your anti-tank guns in place?" Calling up the Air Force and saying, "Send 3 Ju-52 transport aircraft to such and such an airbase." These are things that should be done by the men on the spot, men who have the technical expertise.
The thing that made the Germans better than anybody else in Europe at war was the clean, crisp communications between all arms. Along comes Adolf Hitler, who throws all that stuff in the dustbin.
Under Hitler's command, the Eastern Offensive stuttered to a halt. As winter descended on Stalingrad, exhausted German troops asked their commander-in-chief to let them retreat for warmth and supplies.
He's sitting in the Führer train, the dining car, the rosewood paneled dining car, when another train pulls up alongside. A boxcar carrying German soldiers, bedraggled, demoralized, some grievously wounded. These are troops from Stalingrad. As those ragged scarecrows peer into the window of his dining car, he reaches across the table and pulls down the shade.
In January 1943, news from the Eastern Front had gone from bad to worse for Hitler. After 5 months of bitter fighting for control of Stalingrad, the Soviets had surrounded his troops.
As the Battle of Stalingrad begins to go badly, and as the German army there is cut off, Hitler begins to think in terms of German honor, German strength, German racial superiority. Germans wouldn't be taken by mere Slavs, that sort of thing.
As far as Hitler's concerned, this is now ideological. This is an endgame to deal with Bolshevism and to deal with the Slavs.
And so this racialist nonsense that forms Hitler then comes to drive his decisions.
Sondern weil mir daran gar nichts mehr lag. Nicht nur deswegen, weil vielleicht Herr Stalin daran glaubte. Das Entscheidende ist in diesem Krieg, wer den endgültigen Haken austeilt. Und da können Sie überzeugt sein, das werden wir sein.
So far, 50,000 soldiers had died in the siege of Stalingrad. But Hitler, once again, refused to let his army withdraw.
There's a complete lack of reality at the Führer headquarters. In Stalingrad, men are starving, they've seen their comrades killed, the freezing sub-zero temperatures. It's a cataclysmic scene. But Hitler doesn't want to face up to the realities on the ground.
The image of Hitler is that he spent 4 years during the First World War in the front line, in the trenches, and this is partly because he gives that impression in Mein Kampf. The truth is very different because he's given the job as dispatch runner quite a long way behind the front lines. He's not aware of the sacrifice of the troops in quite the same way as if he was sharing the experience with them.
It's ironic because during the siege of Stalingrad, Hitler berates his generals for not having been frontline soldiers during the First World War. And yet Hitler didn't actually understand what it was like.
He's created this kind of fantasy world, I think, about what German soldiers can do, which bears no reality, in fact, to the extraordinary conditions they had to face on the Eastern Front.
On the 22nd of January 1943, Hitler received a desperate appeal from the German commander inside Stalingrad. His men were surrounded, out of ammunition, and forced to eat their horses to survive. General Friedrich Paulus wanted permission to surrender.
It's a completely logical request from a military commander. Hitler won't allow it because he's still fixated with this idea. You're going to go down in history if you make the Russians know that the Germans will never give in. He insisted that the troops would never surrender, however big a hole they were in, and often they would not withdraw from situations from which they could escape simply as a matter of principle. And that, in more general terms and over the course of the war, was a disaster.
He promotes Paulus to General Field Marshal because he expects his generals and field marshals to fight to the last man and the last cartridge. If not, he expects them to commit suicide.
Hitler thinks that his soldiers are ideological warriors for a great idea. But they're the ones stuck out in a frozen waste, 1,000 miles from home, trying to eat a frozen horse.
A few days later, General Paulus and the troops in Stalingrad surrendered. The German army had lost almost 250,000 men during the battle.
To Hitler, this is the ultimate betrayal. The worst cowardice any of his generals could actually perpetrate is surrendering to the archenemy, the Bolsheviks.
Hitler is distraught and shocked that he didn't just put a bullet in his own brain. Hitler says that the remains of 6th Army should have gathered around in a circle and shot each other with their last bullet.
At the Wolf's Lair, Hitler struggled to deal with the reality of defeat.
Privately, Hitler's in a really, really bad place. The only thing he has for company is one of his Alsatians. It's an emotionally very, very dark and gloomy place he's inhabiting.
Up to that point during the war, he has been having lunch every day with his adjutants and discussing military progress and so on. But he can't bear the reality of this defeat. And so from then on, he eats only with women, usually his secretaries, and those women are under orders to keep the conversation light and cheerful.
You couldn't bring him bad news. If you brought him bad news, you'd be exiled, demoted, executed. Even when a brave subordinate would give him the real estimates, Hitler would often respond, well, he'd write in the margin, this just can't be true. And so Hitler's defeat is written in this inability to wrestle with reality.
Ich darf wirklich sagen, Vorsehung hat es nun anders bestimmt. Und nachdem sich
The extent of Hitler's self-delusion was captured on a secret audio tape.
die Entwicklung
Made without his knowledge by a sound engineer, it's the only known recording of him speaking in private and off the record.
Richtung auch Entschlüsse, und zwar bindende Entschlüsse zu fassen. Der jetzt hinter uns liegt.
Hitler can be heard explaining to Finnish Marshal Carl Gustaf Mannerheim why the assault on Russia wasn't going to plan.
Vielleicht. Wir wussten das selber auch nicht so ganz genau, wie ungeheuerlich diese Strafausrüstung war.
Hitler admits he was not properly prepared. He underestimated Russia, but he can't admit he's wrong. So the way for him to kind of justify or rationalize his mistake, he says, I would have done it anyway.
Und auch selbst jede Not, jede Sorge auf sich zu nehmen.
When Hitler says the Russians had 35,000 tanks, it's clearly an exaggeration.
In truth, at maximum strength, the Soviet army only had around 23,000 tanks. Even in trusted private company, Hitler was manipulating the facts.
These are bald-faced lies. He states them with such confidence that people in the background are going, yes, 35,000, yes, 35,000. What he does then is he has the audacity to say, nonetheless, we knocked out 34,000 of those 35,000 tanks.
Wir haben zurzeit über 34.000 Panzer vernichtet.
When in fact, that's fantasy. He's in a fantasy world.
Wenn ein General von mir erklärt hätte, dass hier im Staat 35.000 Panzer dieser Ziele herren.
In summer 1943, Hitler's state of denial was setting the tone for his entire regime. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had released films showing German women on the home front enjoying the good life. But when Hamburg was carpet-bombed, Hitler could no longer hide the truth. As the city burned, Hitler was unmoved.
On the one hand, he has feelings for animals and children, but on the other, he has an absolute indifference to the suffering of human beings. He believes that these hardships are what the German people have to go through for final victory.
Hitler does not make a gesture toward his public that I'm with you still, I'm one of you. Instead, he buys 3,000 paintings that are going to be housed in a new museum of art. In 1943, 1944, the last thing you want to do is spend an exorbitant amount of money on artworks, and yet he does it. Not exactly a man who's staying with his people to the bitter end in the most horrible of conditions.
One of the funny things, well, funny in a very sick way, is that, Hitler hopes that the Allied bombs will destroy the Berlin Town Hall, which he sees as an execrable form of architecture. Had he been in charge, he would have built a better town hall. And so he keeps looking, have they bombed it yet? Have they destroyed it yet? And if they don't bomb it, I'll be really disappointed, and I might even bomb it myself.
Privately, Hitler was defiant, but as the destruction mounted, he lost his appetite for public appearances.
The sense that Hitler has retreated doesn't go unnoticed, and you even find graffiti smeared around parts of the cities that are critical of the government. Quickly erased, of course.
Once a prolific orator, Hitler only made 2 speeches in 1943. One of them shortly after the defeat at Stalingrad.
It's really an issue for Goebbels to try to coax Hitler to speak to his people. When he does speak, Hitler is himself dejected.
Ich glaubte, dass jetzt die Stätten meiner Arbeit, an die ich seit Monaten gebunden war, mit ruhigem Gewissen verlassen zu können. Dank dem Opfer und Heldendum unserer Soldaten der Ostfront ist es gelungen, nunmehr endgültig die Krise, die das deutsche Heer durch ein unverdientes Schicksal gestürzt worden war, zu überwinden.
It's monotone compared to his normal speeches. He no longer brings people to that crescendo.
Denn das Weimarer Deutschland,
Once Hitler loses his ability to move the German people by his oratory,
die Front zu stabilisieren und jene Maßnahmen einzuleiten,
he's losing the very thing that brought him to power.
die den vor uns liegenden Monaten wieder den Erfolg bis zum endgültigen Siege sichern sollen.
On the 9th of July 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily, opening up a new Western Front. 16 days later, Adolf Hitler's closest Axis ally, Benito Mussolini, was taken into custody by his own government. The Führer began to hatch a daring rescue plan.
The idea of rescuing Mussolini is terrifically exciting for Hitler. It's like a piece of boyish escapism. While the rest of the war's going badly, he can prove himself.
Ultimately, Hitler is a child. He's someone who thinks that getting Mussolini back and putting him back atop a fascist state will somehow turn things around for the Axis. And Hitler has a very curious relationship with Mussolini. In the 1930s, Hitler is very much an acolyte of Benito Mussolini, an admirer. His prized possession is a signed photograph from the Duce.
I think there's a genuine fondness that Hitler feels for Mussolini. Why? Because he's the only other man on the planet who has any idea of what it's like to be a jackbooted dictator of a European fascist state. But of course, the relationship falters as Mussolini's political and military campaigns falter. And so therefore, it's Hitler who has to end up bailing him out.
German intelligence informed Hitler intercepted messages had revealed Mussolini was being held in the Italian Alps.
An SS commando unit crash land a load of gliders on the side of a mountain and storm a hotel, rescue Mussolini in a tiny little Fiesler Stork aircraft, and back in time for tea and medals. Hitler's completely delighted because it's a great coup.
It's done under great cloak and dagger and daring do. It's a fantastic story. He's ecstatic. He wants the details repeated again and again, over and over again, savoring them. Perhaps it is a reminder to him of the sweetness of victory. But of course, it is far from that. It's the rescue of one man, and one man who can no longer play an active role in the war. When Mussolini is brought before Hitler, the Führer is distraught to see the state he is in. He is no longer the once great warlord of Italy. He is an old man in a shabby coat. He's broken.
The glow of Mussolini's rescue quickly wears off, and within hours he's treating Mussolini as a nobody.
In September 1943, Hitler's forces occupied most of Italy, and despite Mussolini's condition, put him in charge of a puppet government. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, German troops were being overwhelmed by the Red Army. 2 months earlier, a German offensive called Operation Citadel was smashed by a Soviet counterattack. 50,000 troops were killed or injured.
And when German army units, army groups, generals countenance withdrawal, he believes that they're not worthy. And he said, those men with their purple stripes down their trousers make me sick. They're worse than Jews. That is how strong Hitler feels about the German general staff.
For one of Hitler's most senior commanders, the feeling was mutual. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein was openly critical of the Führer's aggressive tactics, earning him several visits from Hitler himself.
This is a rich piece of footage, historical context. Hitler, after winning so many battles, now is losing. And his general, von Manstein, is trying to get this message across to Hitler. And he's trying to say, hey, occasionally we need to do a tactical retreat, but Hitler's not about retreat at all. He's forward, forward, forward thinking. And so you note the relationship here. The general is not pleased. I don't like what's happening here. And Hitler's not interested at all. In fact, for most of this footage, he's actually disengaged. You can see that he's not even really listening. He doesn't really even care about all these passionate details that the general is giving him. Instead, he wants to gain power over the situation. He's trying to put his hands on his hips to look powerful, but the hands go up high, so he looks like he has little chicken wings, and he's clocking about this situation. Then there's the big reveal, the handshake. This is the not let go handshake. And this handshake is not the normal 3 to 5 seconds. In fact, it lasts for over 30 seconds. It goes on, and finally, it disengages. But it tells me Hitler is saying, I am done with you. You have no power. I am the one with the power.
Hitler later fired Manstein. He was determined to cleanse the army of anyone who disagreed with him, even his best men. Generals Halder, Guderian, and Rundstedt, heroes from the French campaign, were also dismissed. Hitler replaced them with inexperienced men who would do as they were told.
You know, there are generals who are being paid by Hitler under the table, outside of their normal salary, large sums of money to support him. He's paying them for loyalty. He's paying them to shut up and do their job.
In May 1944, enemy forces converged on the Reich. The Red Army was less than 400 miles from Vienna. The Allies were closing in on Rome and preparing a huge invasion force in England. But Hitler was back at his Alpine HQ, the Berghof, and relaxing with his mistress, Eva Braun.
Eva Braun says it reminds her of the good old days. Short walks with the dogs, films in the evening, sitting by the fire, cake in the tea house, guests staying, people out on the terrace, on the lounges. However, we know that in his relationship with Eva Braun, as in so many other areas of his life, Hitler resorted to drugs. He was injected with testosterone, cocaine eye drops, everything.
As his health worsened, Hitler's leg was shaking uncontrollably. His personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, noted in his diary it was probably stress-related. The treatment was an injection believed to contain methamphetamine.
One of the things that we know more about today than we did in the past is Hitler's drug use. He was on a cocktail of something like 74 drugs. And so this clearly clouds the mind. It'll keep you up, it'll keep you going, but it really robs you of a great deal of perspective. He's an addicted leader. And so all of the flaws that he brings to the table before he gets into drugs become very much amplified by that drug use.
Eva took advantage of Hitler's detached mood and hosted her sister's wedding reception at the Eagle's Nest Tea House above the Berghof.
At weddings and at formal occasions, he's wheeled out as the kind of slightly embarrassing relative who's a bit creepy and austere and detached. He's kind of glassy-eyed and he's just not there anymore.
He's, of course, dealing with his own health issues, his own insomnia, his own worries about where this is all leading. From a propaganda perspective, this is powerful because the whole Hitler myth is built upon sort of accessibility to Hitler, hearing his voice, seeing his face.
When all those things were absolutely needed to convince the German people that Hitler was still the leader of the country, he doesn't show himself at all.
Hitler now based his military command at the Berghof. Each day, a few hours were set aside for strategy meetings with his generals, in what was an otherwise leisurely routine.
The whole kind of schedule of the day is teenagery. And Hitler talks about the 4 years between the death of his father and the death of his mother as one of the happiest periods in his life. And he is absolutely indulged by his mother. He has to do nothing except lie in and enjoy himself. And with the help of drugs and the mountains, and that's what he recreates in the Berghof. So the long lie-in, the late breakfast, the medical treatments, the injections, the pills, before lunch. And then he will walk down to the tea house, eat cake, and he gets driven back uphill because he never likes to physically exert himself. Supper, another vegetarian meal, and then it's a very strong expectation that everyone gathers around the fire and he starts talking. And he talks and talks and talks about art, about race, music, vegetarianism, about history,
talking to
the
people.
difference between...
They'll have to sit there and listen to it. And we have many memoir accounts where people say, my God, I was ready to shoot myself. I thought he would never stop.
More cake is served, and he bangs on and on and on, and nobody can go to bed until he stops. And it can be 2, 3 in the morning.
5th of June 1944. True to his routine, Hitler stayed up late chatting and watching movies with Eva before going to bed around 3 a.m. "600 miles away in Normandy, American paratroopers began the first phase of the Allied invasion. At 6:30 a.m., massed Allied forces began landing on the beaches of Normandy. D-Day was underway. And the Führer couldn't be woken.
Hitler was the only guy that could release divisions, reserve divisions, to repel the invasion, and yet nobody would wake him.
Hitler is literally asleep at the wheel. Landing craft are bringing the troops to the various beaches: Gold, Sword, Juno, Omaha, Utah. The Allies are ashore in Normandy, while Hitler is rubbing the sleep from his eyes.
And it's not until about 10 o'clock that his staff dare to wake him up.
When he does awake, his response is curious. "Gentlemen," he says, "it's finally happened. They're finally here, as I've expected them to come. Now let's see what happens."
Hitler sees this as a moment where the Germans are going to show the British and Americans a proper war.
He is facing disaster with open arms. He's standing on a precipice with the German people. He's going to take them with him to apocalypse.